What is up? It is Tuesday, April 18th. If you know, you know. Welcome to Go FUD Yourself. JD Gagnon here. Good friend Kiara, what is going on?
I really thought that we covered the SEC yesterday so that I wouldn't have to talk about it for the rest of the week. And I was wrong.
I knew this was coming today. So secretly, I was excited about it. But what are we talking about today?
Well, we're gonna just talk a little bit about what's going on with the SEC absolutely today. And then in case you're tired of watching the live stream of it, or if you're tired of hearing about the SEC, we've got a little bit of a backlog of news of things that we didn't cover from the weekend because we covered SEC yesterday. And so that's everything from Silk Road, ETH, and a bit about the crypto winter, and then my favorite, the crypto arms race. I can't.
Girl.
It's been almost a week. I can't stop.
Let's do it. All right, welcome back. Hey, we got that banner up again. SEC. We debated.
You're like a DJ.
Yeah. We debated just live streaming the live stream. But we figured in the end, if people want to watch it, they can simply go do it. It's not like it's hard to access the live stream. It's like on 5,000 YouTube channels streaming live. So all good. But anyways, there's a lot of interesting stuff to speak about with respect to even just the first little bit of Gensler's testimony. There's a lot of, like, as you can imagine, this is the first time Gensler's been in Congress since 2021. So crypto is not the only thing that Congress people are concerned about, and their lobbyists and their constituents. But a lot of questions have been posed with respect to crypto. He was asked point blank if Ether is a security or commodity and fumbled around and looked rather incompetent, in my opinion. And then has been asked questions about like ESG and equity in boardrooms and all of this other stuff, as you can imagine. But I think there's been enough questions about crypto and decentralized information and what their intentions would be if they centralize a lot of this in Washington, example CBDC, and more or less it came out that oversight is their big thing, and the problem with that is that's oversight without warrants, and that kind of goes against privacy rights in the United States and everywhere else. Privacy in the United States is right in the Constitution, so it's probably some of the strongest privacy laws globally still. But anyways, we'll have to see how this shakes out. But it's been an interesting day today. Have you watched it even?
I watched some of it this morning, and then I had to log off while I was doing meetings and stuff. But what I want to know, because a lot of people are going to tune into this and they're going to get super fuddy about it. Yeah. How can you watch Gensler on trial and not get FUD down?
Yeah, I think.
How do we enter this with a good mindset? How do we overcome with our critical thinking? How do we ensure that we're not watching this with our own biases, but we actually hear what he's saying and hear the questions that are being asked? Does that make sense?
I think, yeah. I mean, obviously, just with that in mind, you're probably better equipped than the average person just thinking about that. But I think it's important to remember that, like, he's not on trial here. So this is just a testimony to understand what the hell is going on. And so even though he sounds and appears quite incompetent in some ways, or at least incompetence, maybe not the right word. I'm going to call it biased to incumbents or their donor class or whatever. That's painfully obvious in his responses, I think. And the politics that he's trying to pursue is painfully obvious. He's not acting like the chair of a commission, but rather a politician in his answers, which is, of course, we knew that. We talked about it yesterday. His goal is to be Treasury Secretary, clearly. And so, he's playing politics. But it's important to remember before we get like super elated that, oh, we owned Gensler or any of that stuff. Like, the guy's still the chair of the SEC for the foreseeable future, unless there's some legislation to change the way that the SEC is chaired, which was the proposition. But that's all that's all just.
I thought that was important to address because
Yeah.
without addressing it that way, let's say that, you wake up at noon and you see that SEC is live, has been live on CoinDesk. You go back and you watch it all. You're kind of skipping through parts. You're not sure what you're looking for. You start seeing on Twitter, oh, we owned him. Oh, he didn't know what ETH was. He's not on trial, even though it looks like he's getting interrogated. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are the actual outcomes of this going to be? And what are we looking to achieve by engaging in this conversation with him?
Yeah, those are good questions that we should ask. I think my answers to those questions are, at the very least, we're just trying to figure out, and I think we already knew this. We already knew what their baseline positions are. Like he's in very few words come out and said, we think all of crypto essentially is securities and we're acting accordingly. And unfortunately, that hasn't been validated by either Congress nor the courts, which are the two reasonable outlets to validate that, not the SEC themselves, which is what we're seeing with the Ripple cases and now soon to be Bittrex and others. We will see some of this play out in the courts, but we don't have a banner for this today. But essentially, Brian Armstrong and the rest of the leadership team is in the UK again this week. They were meeting with UK policymakers yesterday and have come up with some really interesting discussions and feel that they're going to be investing heavily in the UK. They also said publicly today that if we don't get regulatory clarity, Coinbase is thinking of leaving the US.
Yeah, I saw that.
And that, combined with some of the questions that are being asked and the obvious politics being played here, I think at least sunlight is the best disinfectant. So at the very least, this is in a very public forum where people from both sides of the aisle are seeing this. Is it going to lead to immediate change? This is Congress. So no, I don't think so. But at the very least, there's some more sunlight now being shone on this than there was yesterday, which is...
Since you're talking about regulatory change, I'm going to quick segue into Polygon Labs publishing an open letter to EU authorities. Did you read about this?
Yeah. Let's put the content of the letter aside for a second. I'm a huge fan of this. This is the only way, if we're waiting for only the lobby organizations, which are great, amazing, actually.
Sure.
Shout out to the BA and others. We're BA members and GBA members and Global DCA members. Also, we pay our dues and participate in lobby and policy influence, of course. But this direct to policymakers, these types of briefs are incredibly invaluable. And the more notable organizations in the space that submit these, the better. That's the only way our voice is going to meaningfully be heard, or at least considered. Maybe not heard, but hopefully considered. And so in this particular case, I believe it's slightly self-serving. Of course, Polygon is focused on DeFi not being securities. They're trying to make the case for why that shouldn't be the case. Whether I agree or disagree isn't the point. It's a bit self-serving. But at the very least, they're doing something. I mean, Rome Blockchain Labs, we submitted to the Treasury and Fed a brief, and you can find that online if you Google it. And it was very high level. This was, a year ago when they were just looking for, basic explanations and opinions on everything. But I think this is our responsibility. If you're in the space, I mean, as individuals or entrepreneurs, I think this is our responsibility. So good on Polygon Labs for doing what we all should be doing.
A few others had signed on to the open letter as well. Like, it was co-drafted. They didn't just, write it. Someone like me didn't write it without any checks and balances either. Right? They went out and they did a little bit of a feedback session first. But they are basically asking the EU to consider that decentralized finance wouldn't be within the regular Data Privacy Act because smart contracts don't have a manual operator, essentially.
Yeah,
it's more or less what it comes down to. But this is interesting because they're watching precedent be set almost the opposite way in America. And so I think it is a really well-timed letter as well.
A couple thoughts on this. That was the argument that we all used up until like 10 minutes ago. Was that, it's programmatic, it's all in code. We're not physically making day-to-day, minute-by-minute decisions on any of these DeFi protocols. My thought on that is, yeah, sure, that's probably true. But at the same time, the only time that things are meaningfully decentralized is if the keys are burned and everything operates via a DAO, which has sufficient distribution, no concentrated parties. There's only a couple platforms in the space. Curve is one of them that is in fact completely non-upgradable and decentralized. But at the end of the day, all of these smart contracts can be updated by someone, which means that there is still some human impact and decision-making and influence on what happens. And yes, a lot less. This is the argument for why, okay, there might be some regulatory obligation here, but it's not near to the same extent as a normal registered security or as a normal operating financial institution that has multiple layers of bureaucracy and many agents working for it that are in an agent capacity, so they can make decisions and influence things throughout these organizations without the board or the C-suite knowing every little detail all the time. It's not the same in blockchain. It's all code. It's all, most of it is open source, in particular, if they're making this argument. So, I mean, it's not near the same situation, which is why we've made the argument all along that there probably should be, if we had a perfect world, there probably should be a separate classification for digital assets if they're done based on smart contracts entirely on chain. The other complicating factor is there's a lot of things that happen off chain with many of these protocols. And that, of course, doesn't help make that argument. So anyways, long story short, appreciate, respect for Polygon for doing this. I think, again, it's evidence of what we should all be doing. But the writing is somewhat on the wall here. It might be too little too late. But again, as we talk about the crypto arms race, this is potentially a good example of, if the UK comes out as a friendly nation on this, and starts to make legislation faster than the US, that won't influence what the US does. So anybody that thinks that is wrong. The US thinks that they're superior from a regulation perspective.
Well,
than
the
anybody
UK is
else.
also in an interesting spot, considering the past news of Brexit, that they could attract all of the other European investment as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little less optimistic that any one of these smaller nations is going to just suck up global population because they approve crypto. I think we're just going to find somewhat of a redistribution, like we've seen over the last couple of years, and we're seeing now more than ever, a massive exodus out of Western domiciled jurisdictions for anybody that meaningfully participates in the space. I think I'm the only.
The UK is going to be
I'm
really
the only.
Call them a smaller nation. They're not going to love that. And
they are a smaller nation.
You will be crypto colonized first.
That's fine. I mean, they can't absorb 50 million people globally. Like that would be impossible. But yeah, you're right. I mean, UK is not tiny. Obviously, they were a financial powerhouse for centuries.
They're experienced in that, right? They are experienced in overtaking where others they've perceived others have fallen short.
Yeah, could be true. I don't think that we're going to see a whole bunch of people.
You don't want to get into an anti-monarchy discussion today? Is that what
we can start there. We can go there if you want, but I think we're going to end up disagreeing on a lot of that. Although, if you're saying you're anti-monarchy, right, I'm also anti-monarchy.
There you go.
So we might actually agree on something politics-wise for once. But anyways, I mean, crypto arms race, like this is alarming for the US. I mean, when we look at companies the size of Coinbase, multiple tens of billions in market cap and hundreds of billions or trillions in volumes, like they are pretty much the only player in the US market. Binance US, but it's a different beast. And so, I mean, Kraken, of course, is in the US, but they've had to pull a lot of their products. So anyways, that would be hugely problematic. And again, like even some of the most respected securities attorneys in the space have come out publicly over the last 24 hours, people that we know well, saying, if you're a US person, the US is closed for crypto business. Like starting a new crypto business today in the US is very ill-advised under the current sentiment. So,
okay, here's something interesting. So we're talking about the SEC, we're talking about the EU. people are getting regulated. They don't know what to do. And a lot of that regulation is still pretty focused on centralized exchanges because that's probably less scary to regulate than decentralized exchanges.
Sure.
And we're actually seeing a lot of people moving their ETH from centralized exchanges to decentralized exchanges with the advent of the Shanghai or the Shapella release, because now they can liquid stake.
Yeah, so it's not that they're moving it to decentralized exchanges per se, but they are moving it on chain. So
the news says decentralized exchanges. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, so Lido isn't an exchange. Lido is a liquid staking protocol. So I think they maybe got their...
Yeah, maybe DApp is a better term.
Yeah, but anyways, I mean, this just makes sense. I think like most of the centralized operators, all they're doing is adding an extra step. You're giving them their assets and they're turning around and going and doing what everybody else is just doing on chain. That's how they're earning yield. And then they're just paying you a fraction of it. And so in the event that there's no regulatory clarity where using a centralized exchange comes with regulatory comfort, there's no advantage really other than simplicity, and you don't have your own keys and all that stuff. But this just makes perfect sense why LSTs are exploding right now. I mean, there's a lot of assets. There's 19 million ETH staked. The amount is going up. There's a considerable uptick in staked ETH, where people thought that in fact it might be the opposite after Shapella. So you don't look as excited about this as I am.
No, I just keep freezing actually.
Oh, perfect.
So I don't know. To me, this is interesting. That regulation is going to come closer to DeFi than ever actually seeing an influx of movement, and they're going to probably get confused. But with all that in mind, more hacks and then more hacks being solved. So Silk Road hacker was sentenced to 1 year and 1 day last week.
Yeah. 50,000 Bitcoin at the time in 2012 wasn't worth what it would be today, obviously. So although it seems like an incredible amount of resources, the theft wasn't as valuable as what you think. But I mean, this just goes to show sometimes it takes time, but they can find ways to try to rectify, unacceptable actions from the past. I mean, 2012, that's a long time away. 1 year, 1 day. Okay. But it's typical white collar crime, right? Often.
It totally is. And I don't know, it's not a harsh sentence because it wasn't worth that much, but it took a really long time. It took 9 years to get through this. Poor guy.
11 years.
But I also found a news item, which I don't have a banner for, but Australians in 2022 lost 221.3 million Australian dollars from crypto scams, which is 162% increase from 2021.
Yeah, I think if we saw that information, that's probably consistent everywhere. I mean,
absolutely. That's why I'm bringing it up. Actually, we did a scams token report where we found that on decentralized exchanges, over 40% of tokens in 2022 were fake tokens trying to mislead you.
Yeah, I mean, as the space gets more notoriety and without regulatory clarity and without KYC, this shit will continue. Because there are loopholes, there are ways for people to, to manipulate. All of this hacking, exploit, fraud nonsense changes if there's KYC. Now, I'm not a complete proponent of blanket KYC. Okay, so that's not what I'm saying. Just saying there are ways that we can prevent a lot of these things. And that's how AML rules and know your client rules came in traditional finance also. Because if you don't know your counterparty and the counterparty does something shitty, you have no recourse. Now, ideally, there's the people on the other side of the fence that would argue, well, that's the point of decentralization, is that it's all on chain and transparent. So there shouldn't, if we do this properly, there shouldn't be opportunities for your counterparty to screw you, because it's all programmatic. But as we can see, the technology isn't near as mature as it would need to be for that to happen. And it may never get there, because anytime we think we've got it that way, there's someone that has found a way around it. There's a lot of smart people on this planet. soon to be eclipsed by AI, of course. But
okay, here's where I'm going with this though, because I do think it's interesting. So we have the SEC, we have data rules in the EU, we have BRICS going on, we have CBDCs that are succeeding and failing, we have hacks that are happening, scams that are happening, some of them being solved, some of them not being solved. And people are still saying that it's crypto winter, people are still saying that it's bear market. And where it gets really interesting is that people haven't disengaged. And despite all of this FUD and all of this negativity, sentiment is actually quite high. So I use a couple of different news tracking tools. And specifically when we talk about the SEC, sentiment is half positive, half negative. When we talk about scams, sentiment is almost always half positive, half negative. When we talk about regulation, sentiment is half positive, half negative. And I'm not saying half exactly, but like within a couple of percent. People are really split on these kinds of issues. And we're seeing from the numbers, which CoinDesk just kind of reported on today, that although people haven't invested as much, there is still a lot of activity. So it's interesting to me that we have all this negativity going on. We talk about being really FUDdy. We talk about not getting caught down in the FUD, but people are still, actioning. So maybe we're not getting caught down in the FUD. Like, are we just a FUDdy group?
No, I think, fear sells, right? So like, where do we get most of our sentiment from if we don't have tools like this and platforms like we do to analyze this stuff? The average person goes to Twitter or Telegram. And so first of all, the most vocal people are generally in the minority, one way or another on issues, or at least at the fringes of issues. And they're loud. And, if you're trying to build a following, generally speaking, you want to have polarized opinions and you want to be convicted in what you're saying. And that's what we see. And so things are, hyperbolic often. I use that word a lot. There's a lot of hyperbole in news and Twitter and all that stuff. It's because people pay attention. If you're afraid that this is the last day of crypto on Earth, then you pay attention to those articles, you read through, you see what these people have to say. In the end, you might be like, yeah, okay. Not that big of a deal. But anyways, so you have to approach this with a critical eye. I think in terms of activity, I agree with this, of course, like both from their study, which you never really know the significance of the study. How many people did they actually ask? Like, was it a Twitter poll or some nonsense that already has bias based on their follower bias? But anyways, long story short, anecdotally and from our own experience, I think there's a lot of developer activity. Like there's a lot of really, really, really intelligent people, groups, companies, institutions building right now. So that's very promising. And I just, again, it's like any market. If there's so much uncertainty, people aren't putting dollars in per se, new money into the market. But, people are trying different things, trying to understand different strategies. Bear markets are the best time for both builders and users to research. There's not so much FOMO. There's not so much hype. There's not so much chaos all the time. It's you have more time to look things through and meaningfully engage projects and founders and so on. So yeah,
I think that might be why sentiment is so high. Actually, is the relationship building. When we think about sentiment, you're right. There's news and there's Twitter and so on and so forth. But some of the tools that we use go actually via Twitter. You can tell what the sentiment is of what people are talking about on particular articles, that kind of thing on particular topics. Yeah. And one of the reasons I think that sentiment isn't that low and that activity does continue is the personal relationships. I mean, you've been in the space for a really long time and you have a plethora of networks, but I've only been here for a year and a half. And, my Telegram is also full of talking with people and developing those relationships and knowing people internationally and what projects they're working on and what they're backing and what their friends are working on. And I think I get more hearts via crypto than I do from my relationship, right? Like we all seem to really like each other. And because it has been a bear market, there's almost like some trauma bonding that occurs. But that sentiment is high. Like we're here and we're here to stay. That's what I think is really interesting is we have the SEC, we have all this FUD, we have all this FOMO, we have all these scams. And then everyone's like, but, it's not that bad.
Yeah. I agree with you, actually. That's a really good point. Sentiment is an interesting one because you just don't know why people feel the way that they do. Like it's the same reason that, near half the country likes Biden and near half the country likes Trump. Mm-hmm. Why does anybody like either of them at this point? Like, anyways.
Anyone like either of them?
That's what I said. Yeah. Like why anybody likes either of them is kind of up in the air, I suppose. Like if we let what they've done and said be evidence of whether they should. Anyways, we don't need to get into that nonsense. But yeah, I think, you know, sentiment is good. What's really fun about being in the space is, like, to your point, it's a very collaborative environment still. And often emerging markets are this way because it's, yes, of course, it's a blue ocean and everybody's trying to establish market dominance and market position, but it's a blue ocean. You're not necessarily fighting for the same pie. You're all working together to grow the pie. And I think what has maybe solidified that more than ever has been the regulatory nonsense and some of the trauma over the last bit. I maybe wouldn't use the same trauma bonding, but there's been a lot of shit that's happened. And I think that's led to even greater collaboration and support. And yeah, anyways, I think there's definitely a promising future. I mean, whether crypto is securities or isn't securities or commodities or whatever, it doesn't matter. We're still going to move forward. Like we're all going to find ways to accommodate that. Like that's not a question. It's just frustrating in the short term with all the uncertainty when it doesn't need to be uncertain.
This is like the most heartwarming Go FUD Yourself.
It's been a heartwarming day. I mean, we're not all fuddy all the time. But anyways, if you're looking for more fireworks, I think Gensler's still talking.
Yeah, we're going to go do that now. So
yeah. We're all just going to go watch that shit now. But anyways, same place, same time. We'll be back tomorrow.
Go FUD yourself, JD.
Oh, go FUD yourself.
That ages us. I think the new one's like...
I don't know even how to do a heart. My finger,
the new
my
one's
hands
like
are
upside down. I don't know. Gen Zs have really flexible elbows, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, like what the hell? Anyways, it's Z. It's not Z. It's Z, Gen Z. Z. But anyways, we're here every day, Monday to Friday, same time, same place. Kiara, go FUD yourself.
Go FUD yourself, JD.